Hold on.
Right now.
Oh, Jesus.
This is the bog down though.
Absolutely, yeah. Yes, but I do need to say this. Right now, a big part of the reason that our contact tracing is slowing down
Looks like everyone is in, Jen.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. All right, I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is a meeting of the Rhode Island Coastal Resources Management Council. Today's date is October 27, 2020, and the time is 6:07. We're conducting this meeting via Zoom platform, which is both being recorded and transcribed by our court reporter. For the record and for the benefit of all the meeting participants, I'd like to identify all the council members on this call, and then proceed to all the CRMC staff members who are on this call. When I call your name, if you could identify yourself by a yes or here or any other method, so that the people in the audience can see who you are. So I'll start with myself. Jennifer Cervenka, Chair. Ray Koya, Vice Chair.
Ray Koya here.
Mike Hudner.
Hudner here.
Don Gomez.
Gomez here.
Ron Gagnon.
Ron Gagnon here.
And Patricia Reynolds.
Patricia Reynolds here.
Thank you. Those are all our council members participating tonight. And from CRMC staff, Jeffrey Willis, our Executive Director.
Jeff here.
Thanks. James Boyd, our Acting Deputy Director.
James Boyd here, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We have two legal counsel with us on the call tonight. That would be John Longo, who was with us last time. And in addition, we have Tony DeSisto. John, if you could identify yourself first.
John Longo here.
Thank you. Tony?
Tony DeSisto here.
Thank you. We also have Danny Goulet, who's our senior engineer.
Dan Goulet here.
Lisa Turner, our recording secretary.
Lisa here.
Ryan Moore, our moderator for this meeting.
Here, Madam Chair.
Laura Dwyer, our public outreach coordinator.
Here, sorry.
Thank you. And finally, Cindy Tagney, who is our stenographer tonight.
Present.
Thank you. Before we get into our agenda, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Moore, who's going to walk us through the rules for tonight's Zoom meeting. Ryan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome to the Coastal Resources Management Council Virtual Semi-Monthly Meeting, October 27th, 2020, conducted in accordance with Executive Order 20-75, 58 Supplemental Emergency Declaration Extension of Executive Orders. If you are having troubles with your computer audio, please use this number for the meeting. It is also posted in the Zoom chat box with the password. A note to all participants in attendance, please be advised this is an online meeting including all audio, video, and names and comments will be visible in the chat box are being recorded. All members of the public who wish to comment during these proceedings must correctly identify themselves before proceeding. Council members, applicants, and CRMC staff, turn video on. Do not use phone or computer audio at the same time. Raise your hand or use the raise hand button to be recognized by the chair. Identify yourself by name. Use the chat box to communicate any issues with audio or video to the moderator. Members of the public, please keep your video off. Mute your microphone when not speaking. Use the raise hand function to be recognized by the chair. Wait to be recognized by the chair and unmuted by the moderator to speak. Identify yourself by name. Those on phones, please press *9 and to use the raise hand function. When recognized, identify yourself by name. Use the chat box to communicate any issues with audio or video to the moderator. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Am I seeing it correctly, Mr. Moore, that we have 178 participants? Yeah, 78.
That is correct.
Okay. All right, let's move on to our agenda. First, we have some administrative matters that we take care of before we get into our one application that's on for decision tonight. So first, the approval of the minutes from our last meeting, which was October 20, 2020. Those were circulated by Ms. Turner to all council members.
Move approval, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Koya. Is there a second?
Second, Hudner.
Thank you, Mr. Hudner. I'm going to do a roll call. All those in favor say aye. Ray Koya.
Ray Coyer votes aye.
Mike Hudner.
Hudner, aye.
Don Gomez.
Gomez, aye.
Ron Gagnon.
Ron Gagnon, aye.
Patricia Reynolds.
Reynolds, aye.
And myself, Jennifer Cervenka, aye. The motion to approve the October 20, 2020 minutes is approved. And we move now to subcommittee reports. And I believe that's going to be handled by Mr. Boyd.
Yes, Madam Chair, indeed. I do have a subcommittee report for the council. The council's Planning and Procedures Subcommittee met on July 28th and August 25th, 2020 via the Zoom online meeting platform to review and consider proposed amendments to the CRMC's management procedures identified in the Rhode Island Code of Regulations as 650-RICR-10-00-1. The proposed amendments to subsection 1.4.6A concerning the council's application fees would reduce the application fee for small-scale, low-cost projects within the CRMC's jurisdiction, continue the application fee waiver for non-federal dredging projects associated with an Army Corps Federal Navigation Maintenance Project in the Providence River and Harbor, and would provide for an application fee waiver for coastal hazard resiliency projects as part of an Army Corps federally funded project. In addition, the proposed management procedure amendments would correct existing text and citation errors. Then earlier today, October 27th, 2020, the Planning and Procedures Subcommittee met via the Zoom online meeting platform to review and consider proposed amendments to the CRMC's freshwater wetlands in the vicinity of the coast regulations, identified in the Rhode Island Code of Regulations as 650-RICR-20-00-2. Rhode Island state law pertaining to freshwater wetlands was amended to strengthen the protection of freshwater wetland resources and the need to protect and regulate the areas adjacent to freshwater wetlands, while streamlining the regulatory framework applicable to projects and activities proposed in or near freshwater wetlands. Implementation of the state law required both the CRMC and the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management to undertake rulemaking within their respective regulatory programs. In addition, state law eliminates the regulation of by municipalities.
Can you repeat that? You broke up.
Of amended
Mr.
state
Boyd, can you repeat
regulations.
that?
I will, Cindy, sorry about that. I'll begin with implementation of the law required both the CRMC and the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management to undertake rulemaking within their respective regulatory programs. In addition, the state law eliminates the regulation of freshwater wetlands and buffers by municipalities upon adoption of amended state regulations. The CRMC and DEM have drafted amendments to their respective existing freshwater wetland rules to fulfill the statutory mandates. Preliminary draft rules were the subject of a public workshop in September 2019, and the current draft agency rules reflect revisions in response to public feedback. The statutory changes to definitions in the state law affecting the wording in all sections of the agency rules would result in a new framework for the regulatory process. Hence, the rulemaking process involves the repeal and replacement of the current existing CRMC freshwater wetland rules. The major new changes include the definition of freshwater wetlands, which now refers to the resources to be protected, which includes all vegetated wetlands and surface waters. The designated jurisdictional area now includes the area extending 200 feet from the edge of a river, stream, or drinking water supply reservoir, and 100 feet from all other freshwater wetlands. In addition, the draft regulations specify requirements for freshwater wetland buffers and setbacks within the jurisdictional area. And the term buffer zone has been added to refer to the land that is contiguous to a freshwater wetland and within which a vegetated buffer should be maintained or in some situations created. Buffer zones are designated within or up to the limit of the jurisdictional area. To support regulatory process improvements, the CRMC draft regulations expand or clarify certain exemptions, simplify the application fee schedule, and introduces a general permit process. In addition, the draft rules have been reconstructed to have the performance standards and the review criteria listed within a single section with specific variance criteria consistent with the CRMC's existing variance procedures. Draft rules related to agricultural activities have been grouped into its own section, and rules related to coordination with the municipalities have been specified. The proposed draft regulations are an effort to provide substantial freshwater wetland resource protection while creating efficiency and predictability within the regulatory permitting process. The CRMC and the DM have planned a simultaneous advancement of the rulemaking process for the agency's respective proposed freshwater wetlands regulations, with expected adoption in early 2021. Both agencies will establish an effective date approximately 6 to 12 months following the adoption of the proposed freshwater wetland regulations to provide applicants some regulatory relief with major land development projects that are substantially complete in a municipal permitting process. The CRMC Planning and Procedures Subcommittee voted this morning to advance the rulemaking process for these proposed amendments, which at a later date will include a 30-day public notice, a council public hearing, and a subsequent council meeting for regulation adoption. That's the end of my report, Madam Chair and council members.
That was pretty thorough, Mr. Boyd.
Yeah, sorry that was a bit lengthy on the subcommittee report, but
No,
the
that's good.
freshwater wetland regulation redrafting is a substantial effort, and I wanted to make sure that the council.
Thank you. Yeah, you're freezing up, but yeah, Mr. Boyd, that's great. And Don Gomez and I were on a policy and planning subcommittee meeting this morning, so we talked a lot about it this morning. So I would ask if any other council members had questions for Mr. Boyd about the new freshwater wetlands regulations rulemaking process or any of the substance. Okay, hearing none, you guys will be hearing more about it, right, Mr. Boyd, a little bit later.
Correct, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to Mr. Willis. Mr. Willis, do you have anything to report?
I do, Madam Chair. I have two items in a staff report. One, just a reminder that the Fisheries Advisory Board is meeting this Thursday to begin the negotiation meetings between the FAB, council staff, and Ørsted, the South Fork Wind Farm developer, over our enforceable policy on the fisheries mitigation plan. We expect there to be at least another meeting following this, if not one after that, to enter into and conclude those negotiations. The other is I wanted to let the council know that Eco Rhode Island News is looking to put together a piece on women in science and to talk about climate change adaptation, and has asked our own Janet Friedman to be part of the panel discussion to generate that piece for the Eco News Rhode Island web page. So amongst other members in state government, non-governmental organizations, the university, Janet will participate along with our former staffer, Caitlin Chafee, who is now over at DEM in the Narragansett Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve. So I just want to let the council know that we'll be seeing some efforts in outreach and climate change adaptation from this panel that Eco Rhode Island News will put out, and like I said, our own Janet Friedman will be part of that panel.
Mr. Willis, when you say panel, is it a panel that creates something that's a written product, or is it some piece like this Zoom where they're all on a panel and they're giving a presentation?
No, my understanding is that it will result in a written piece for Eco Rhode Island News's webpage. I do know that they're meeting digitally, however, to accomplish that.
Okay. Congratulations to Janet.
Absolutely.
Any questions for Mr. Willis on what he just reported on? Okay, hearing none. Thank you, Mr. Willis. We'll proceed to the continuation of 2019-06-014 Jamestown Boatyard. This is a continuation from our meeting, our special meeting on October 20th, 2020. As we last left it, we were in the middle of public comment. And I believe my notes indicated that we had 27 people who wanted to speak, and we got through 7 through a Kim Westcott, and we were going to continue with the remaining 20. Mr. Moore has the list of those who wanted to speak, which he will pick up at person number 8. And as we indicated in our last meeting, there will be no other public comment other than those who signed up for it last week. Following that, we will have rebuttal if they want from the applicant to address anything that was brought up in the public comments or by Mr. Shea or Mr. Landry. And as I understand, Mr. Shea, Attorney Shea, would like to make a request as well. So, but for right now, I want to just pick up where we left off at person number 8 of our list of people who will provide public comment. And so, Mr. Moore, if you could call off that first name.
Yes, Madam Chair. Pat Sheehan is speaking next.
Thank you.
And am I available to you?
I see you, Ms. Sheehan.
Thank you very much. My name is Patricia Sheehan. I've lived in Jamestown since the early 1970s. And at that time, I moored, sailed a 25-foot classic boat in the Dumplings. For the past 30 years, I've been kayaking the Dumplings Cove, and I added paddleboarding to the mix about a dozen years ago. I enjoyed touring on both and also have race experience. And my season generally ranges from mid-May to November. And I paddle the Dumplings weekly. You know, a kayak and an SUP can be car-topped anywhere. But I repeatedly come back to the Dumplings because of just the raw beauty of the rugged shoreline, the bird-covered rock islands, as well as to play in the currents that swirl past Clingstone and throughout the cove. On the East Coast alone, I have paddled extensively: Florida, the Carolinas, Virginia, Maryland, Chesapeake, New York, New England states. I'm not a scientist, but I do recognize that the geology of the Dumplings is unique for the East Coast, and in my own opinion, significantly adds to the quality of the coastal resources. The next closest place that you find anything like this area is down East Maine. Concerns for on-the-water safety are ingrained in me. I grew up as the daughter of a Coast Guard officer, a career officer. In the marine world, I've worked in race management as the sailing director for the New York Yacht Club. I was race administration director for US Sailing, the national governing body of sailing, and have served on the board and the executive committee of Sail Newport. In each of these positions, individual safety was the highest priority. There's a lot going on in the congested Dumplings area: the boatyard, railway, the launch, dinghies, moorings, rocks, shallow spots, swimming area, small vessels, boats of all sizes, and some more familiar with the area and its activities than others. It is tricky to navigate because of the fairway's limited size and the intensity of use. The passage between the existing boatyard dock and the closest large dumpling is made more difficult by a marked submerged rock east of the dock. I'd also like you to please consider that the footprint of the marina use changes based on the length of the boats and the slips, as many of the boats extend beyond the slips themselves. With the capacity for larger boats and larger overhangs, the navigable fairway will be further reduced. As is the case at other marinas I paddle by, such as Newport Shipyard, larger vessels additionally require an anchor extending farther out to secure them at the dock. I don't know if this eventuality has been considered in the application and its review. As busy and as unsafe as it may be due to the low profile of a kayak or a paddleboard, I prefer to stick to the fairway rather than cut through the mooring field where I would most likely not be seen coming from behind another boat. Another factor that concerns me is the sea conditions that exist throughout the cove in a strong northerly or nor'easter. There is a considerable chop and swells that run down between the rocks and shore, making it challenging to steer through, even in a powerboat with a 100 horsepower engine. You really need room to safely maneuver. As a member of the Jamestown Zoning Board of Review for 10 years, and as a grants administrator of a state-run but federally funded grant program, I appreciate that CRMC's decisions are based on the enabling legislation and the agency's regulations. I know CRMC recognizes that safety is the purview of the Coast Guard and the harbor masters. And when an application before the council greatly affects the safety of the public, shouldn't those entities be required to provide an assessment and an opinion to CRMC? As a race manager, I was required by federal regulations to submit a marine event permit for even a single day's race to ensure that the organizer has the procedures and the resources to ensure the safety of the participants and to demonstrate that the event did not infringe on the public's right to the waterway. In this application, CRMC is reviewing a permanent change that affects safety and the use of the public resources without Coast Guard or local harbor masters review. I second what others have observed. It's a lot busier in the Cove. It's not like it used to be. It's not safe. I know the application before you has been pared down from the initial submission, but I and others feel the safety limit has already been exceeded. Due to navigational and safety concerns, I oppose any increased length of the docks, additional slips, and a more intensive use of the dock for marina purposes. It only benefits the shipyard owner. The public does not benefit. The public's use of the waterfront is further endangered by a more intensive commercial taking of the waterfront. Although the applicant states that there will be less traffic because boats can remain on the new pier, larger vessels with higher freeboard present an even greater hazard to those of us low in the water, either on boards, kayaks, or swimming. I don't believe the application is in the best safety interest of the boating public. I, along with my 8 and 9-year-old grandchildren, who frequently accompany me through the dumplings as we paddle from Greens Pier to the dumpling beaches, really don't want to be the next accident that is observed from the swimming pier. So please protect our marine resources for our children, grandchildren's enjoyment and appreciation. And thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Sheehan. Mr. Moore?
Lisa Lafort is next, Madam Chair.
Okay, there I am. Hi, I'm Lisa Allen Lafort. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. I'm a lifelong summer resident of Jamestown. I first jumped off the Dumplings dock in 1960, the year my family bought a home up on Newport Street at number 27. The house overlooked the boatyard. It was a lot smaller then. I now live down on Walcott Avenue. I still swim off the Dumplings dock. 3 generations of my family call Jamestown their favorite place. I also race sailboats here. We have a Hinckley 50 called Watermark and a 12-meter called Challenge 12. I'm the navigator of record on both. We won the 12-meter Worlds last year. I'm seasoned in the tidal currents. I'm seasoned with the unmarked or mismarked rocky shores along Jamestown. I'm familiar with marinas and the challenges of docking in these currents and winds. I've used navigational software like Expedition and seen what this cove looks like on those charts. I'll contrast today a little bit with the past. When I was a child, the boatyard was named Wharton's. It was small, family owned. You're going to hear more about that. It was dominated by the recreational use. Most of the moorings were, I'd say, are used by sailboats that didn't even use their engines or didn't have engines. They could sail throughout the cove. Swimming was unrestricted. Mrs. Benning, who's still alive today at 96, she circumnavigated swimming the cove every day, going north up towards Laurie's and back down around towards Bull Point. The yard eventually became the Jamestown Boat Yard, specializing in North or Swan maintenance, and with it, some growth. More moorings, bigger boats. The dock grew a little, floating docks, finger piers, and some dockage to accommodate some boats instead of them being moored. We all know what the demand for mooring is like on Jamestown. If you look at an aerial view from the Newport Bridge down to Clingstone, the Dumplings Cove is the most densely occupied. And the reason for that, of course, is the dumplings themselves. The mooring field is now extended beyond the rocks, but within the rocks, it is incredibly dense. Why is that? Well, between the Dumpling Rock, that is just due east of the boatyard dock, and the dock itself is only 300 feet. Within that, as was just mentioned, there's submerged rocks to the north and to the northwest. Those are marked. There are 3 rows of moorings within that space and an unmarked rock. The depth of water inside the dumplings is 10 feet max. There's some areas, many areas, 6, 7 feet, maybe 8. Current can reach 1.5 knots coming around Bull Point. It is tricky. I would never bring a boat under sail into this cove anymore, unless it was like a 420, a dinghy. It's just too tight quarters and there's too many moving parts. Large sailboats, for example, have higher freeboards, as has been mentioned, and greater windage, and often their engines only provide minimal acceleration. Trying to maneuver through this cove is difficult with the wind and the current. Today, more than 30% of the boats on these safe harbor moorings are more than 40 feet, and they draw more than 6 feet. We've witnessed, sitting on the Dumplings dock, many close calls as boats weave through the moored yachts. Why are they weaving? It's because there's no clear channel for passageway into the cove, there's no clear channel to the dock, and there's no clear channel north and south. As a matter of fact, the swimming field of the Dumplings area now has shrunken so much that at times, if there's an easterly breeze, the transom of the sailboats actually hang over into that swimming area and completely block any navigation going north-south or south-north. The cove has been discovered and unfortunately is turning into a parking lot. For the last 50 years of my life, the commercial boatyard has coexisted with the Dumplings Association and with recreational users of the cove. But now that balance has reached a tipping point. To summarize, the cause of that tipping point is 2 things. First, the recreational use of the cove has increased dramatically, as we have heard. There's day trippers that are anchored and people swimming from their boats to shore. There's small sailing craft, kayakers, paddle boarders. There are still people moored, obviously, in the mooring field that try to sail to their moorings scarily. But mostly, there are many, many, many moorings. The Dumpling dock is still heavily used. The beach is still heavily used. There is many people who come to the cove because of its protected nature from the winds and the current. The second reason for this shift in balance is that the boatyard has substantially increased their dominance of this cove. The number of Jamestown Boatyard safe harbor moorings has grown by over 50% since the last study. Went from 55 to 81. And now they want to expand even further. Safe Harbor owns a network of marinas, and the company encourages their clients to use all their marinas. As a result, this past summer, the transient business of Jamestown Boatyard grew by 25%. That's their numbers. It was in the Jamestown Press. We don't need more boaters that are unfamiliar with this small cove waterway, with the rocks, with the tides, with the current, with the swimmers, with the recreational users. We don't need any more boaters who are indifferent or unaware of the unique and vulnerable nature of this cove. Reasonable boundaries have been set for decades, and we've been working within them. We can continue to coexist, but we need to keep these boundaries firm. Please do not allow this expansion any further. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. LaForte. Ryan?
Next, we have Chris Powell.
You have me?
Oh, we can hear you.
Can you hear me? I don't see me yet.
Right,
Start
we
your
can hear
video.
you, but not see you.
All right, start my video. There goes.
Right.
You see me now?
Yes, we can.
We all said, okay, thank you. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak. My name is Chris Powell. I've lived in Jamestown for over 40 years. I was chair of the Jamestown Conservation Commission for 27 years. I sailed on Narragansett Bay almost all my life, at least for the last 40 years. I have intensively. I have a master's in marine ecology and fisheries from George Mason University. I was a marine fisheries biologist for DEM Fish and Wildlife, where I ran the Narragansett Bay Juvenile Finfish Survey that sampled the entire bay for over 25 years. I also was the habitat biologist that reviewed all the coastal development projects with their potential impact for fish and habitat in Rhode Island marine waters. I even worked briefly for CRMC in the 1980s doing coastal review of coastal applications. I'm currently the Rhode Island representative on the Atlantic Coastal Fish Habitat Partnership Steering Committee. That's a national group. I'm very familiar with Narragansett Bay, its marine life, and its habitats. The waters around Connecticut Island also have over half the healthy eelgrass beds in Narragansett Bay. Dumplings Cove, due to its location at the mouth of Narragansett Bay, its unique coastal and underwater geology, extensive eelgrass beds, is a very unique part of the bay, as was stated earlier. It's a very unique habitat. At Wharton Shipyard, built in the early 1900s, currently the Jamestown Boatyard, not been present at the time CRMC classified the water types in the state in the 1970s, I feel that this area probably and most certainly would have been classified as a type 1 conservation area. The cove's coastal beauty, with its rocky bluffs, cliffs, large rock islands, unique underwater habitat, meet all the CRMC's criteria for a type 1 conservation water. Considering there are unique and sensitive marine habitats in this area, I was really surprised to see the lack of a CRMC biologist report addressing the biological impacts of this proposal and the dredging on the Dumplings Cove. It's very surprising that that biological report was not present and was not done. There's only a CRMC engineer report, and then a CRMC funded or whoever funded SAV or submerged aquatic vegetation survey. No biologist report for the project. I also did not see any requirement, and I've read that the applicant will be required to do silt curtains during the dredging operation to reduce impacts outside the proposed dredging area, something that should be strongly considered. According to swimmers that I've talked to at the Dumplings Pier, the current in the area is quite strong, and it's been stated already. This, along with the frequent nor'easters that we have in Jamestown, the fetch goes all the way to Hog Island. These winds and currents will transport sediments in the area, silting in the proposed dredge basin, and probably requiring frequent dredging. It's also possible that during periods between the end of the dredge window, which ends on January 31st, and the beginning of the boating season, usually in May, possibly June, that this basin may silt in, requiring maintenance dredging outside the dredge window to accommodate larger vessels during the up and coming boat season. Something to think seriously about. The applicant would probably want to dredge outside the dredge window if it silts in during the winter before they open and after the dredge window closes. Since the boatyard has successfully functioned for over 100 years, and Safe Harbors owns 9 boatyards in Narragansett Bay, 4 of which are in the lower bay, 1 within 3 miles of Safe Harbors Jamestown Boatyard, why would CRMC risk the impacts to this sensitive ecosystem from dredging and increased boat activity when these larger deep draft vessels can simply move across the bay to another safe harbors facility, Safe Harbors Newport Shipyard, which has the capacity and the water depth for these large deep draft vessels. It seems to me that Safe Harbors would designate each of their marinas and boat facilities to accommodate vessels that are best suited for that facility and that location. Finally, it's my opinion that the carrying capacity of this unique and sensitive area has already been reached or exceeded, and the proposed marine expansion and the dredging should really not be approved by the Coastal Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Powell.
Stuart Ross is next.
Can anyone hear me yet?
We can hear you, not see you.
Hopefully I'll come on. I'll get started anyway. Start my video, okay? Thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Stuart Ross, and I'm a lifelong Jamestowner and recreational user of Dumplings Cove. I speak tonight to the council as a deeply concerned member of the public about the impact JBY's proposal to CRMC will have on the marine, scenic, and recreational environment of Rhode Island. CRMC's mission statement says in part, our primary responsibility is for the preservation, protection, development, and where possible, the restoration of the coastal areas of the state. Apart from the fact that the mission statement is lacking the word responsible in front of the word development, please note its first two words, preservation and protection. With those mandates in mind, CRMC must look at the proposal with the greatest skepticism and concern. We all know the history of this application with two major revisions over 8 months, but one statement stands out on the first page of the first revision in November 2019 after the original application was rejected on very sound environmental grounds. Quote, the applicant reserves the right to pursue the configuration as presented in the original submittal through a new application at a future date in order to expedite the permitting of the proposed project and to minimize adverse impacts to their operations for the coming season. So unless they disavow that statement, which they did not in the second revision, they are on the record as saying the revised application was only stopgap, so to be up and running by the summer, and that they are telling CRMC and the public their long-term objective is to build out much more extensively in an acknowledged environmentally reckless fashion. Next, the petitioners told the Jamestown Town Council in February and last week that the only beneficiaries will be JBY's current large boat owners to service their boats at all tides. But analysis of the size and drafts of 66 boats moored at SHJBY last year clearly showed that only 2 of these boats draw more than 8 feet, meaning that the vast majority of the fleet, of which 75% are under 30 feet in length, would not require deeper dredging. The study was conducted using the U.S. Coast Guard database and formally submitted to CRMC this month. Clearly, the need for deeper dredging would be to attract larger, deeper keel boats from elsewhere. Steve DeVoe also told the same public forum that these requested improvements would not be profitable for JBY. However, there's no question that longer slips in deeper water, when not being used for repairs, will naturally attract more transient boaters into larger yachts, particularly, quote, members of other safe harbor marinas. Because Safe Harbors Marina's stated policy is that any marina member is invited to put in at any other safe harbor owned marina for a fee, of course. And here's the invitation from the homepage of the Safe Harbor JBY website. Dumplings Cove is peacefully nestled among the granite bluffs and gorgeous coastal landscapes of Narragansett Bay's East Passage. A premier marine service facility, first-class amenities, and summer days abundant in lively cookouts, acclaimed music festivals, and thrilling regattas give boaters a truly all-inclusive waterfront experience. I ask you, with that kind of welcome, what Safe Harbor member wouldn't want to bring their boat into Dumplings Cove and pay Safe Harbor JBY for that privilege? Well, as you've heard, that visitor policy is already paid off for JBY, as Mr. DeVoe told the Jamestown Press 3 weeks ago, that the number of transient moorings used by Safe Harbor members was up 25% this summer. So more dock space just for current repairs? I don't think so. A 25% increase in traffic could be minuscule compared to what we might expect if this application is granted. Now, let's compare those private benefits to the few large boat owners that JBY professes to only be supporting in this petition, meaning service at low tide, against the known public risks to countless Rhode Islanders, including, we've heard a lot about this already, As was clear from the testimony this week and last week, there are still many unknowns with dredging, particular rates at which an area must be redredged due to local currents and storm frequencies. So there remains significant potential endangerment of the eelgrass beds immediately adjacent to the proposed dredging area. And once the dredging is done, the negative effects can't be undone. They're permanent. You can't undredge the cove bottom. As we've heard from many testifiers so far, there'll be enormous public safety impacts on swimmers, kayakers, divers, small boat operators, and paddleboarders, whose long-time recreational use of the cove will be seriously compromised due to increased traffic from boaters and larger yachts unfamiliar with navigating the tricky and often dangerous waters of Dumplings Cove. Finally, irreparable damage will occur to the uniquely scenic and historic viewscape of the cove, one of the most famous and sublime vistas in our ocean state. So I asked the CRMC counselors, in your appointed roles as sworn public servants to the people of Rhode Island, one question: in your best judgment, and considering your solemn mission to preserve and protect Narragansett Bay, certainly a higher calling than simply accepting a narrow contested staff report, are the private benefits for a few honestly worth the greater public risks to everyone else? The answer to this question can only be a resounding no, as over 550 Jamestown residents and the Jamestown Town Council and the Jamestown Conservation Commission have already respectfully asked you to respond. So you must now tell the petitioners loudly and clearly so that all Rhode Islanders can hear no. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ross.
Next is Scott Rurin.
Good evening. I'm Scott Rurin, the Director of Conservation at the Audubon Society of Rhode Island. I'm a PhD ecologist, and the Audubon Society of Rhode Island opposes the proposed Jamestown Boatyard expansion. We steward over 9,500 acres of land for habitat and conservation, including 2 of the dumplings, immediately adjacent to the Jamestown Boatyard. Coastal habitats serve many functions for wildlife, and they are constantly under threat of disturbance from storms, sea level rise, and human encroachment. Many birds will avoid using and nesting in these habitats.
You're breaking up a little bit.
Okay, how far back should I go? Many birds will avoid using and nesting in these habitats when human activities increase. Natural coastlines also help protect inland areas from storm energy, while developed shorelines disrupt these natural ocean processes. I've been visiting the Racket Road and Dumplings coastal shoreline for 15 years in my capacity as the Director of Conservation at Audubon, and I'm aware of the vital nature of this area. Birders from Jamestown and visitors to this neighborhood report many wonderful coastal birds. The most recent Bird Atlas survey conducted by URI reveals both common species of the Jamestown shoreline, as well as some special birds that could be disturbed by a boatyard expansion. These vulnerable birds include double-crested cormorants, green heron, black-crowned night heron, osprey, herring gulls, great black-backed gulls, common terns, spotted sandpiper.
I'm missing some of the, I'm sorry, you're going in and out for me. I don't know if anyone else hears that.
Not sure. Anybody else have trouble?
They're nodding yes.
Yes, I'm having trouble.
So I have these vulnerable birds include, can you just start again from there?
Sure.
Mr. Ruhan, perhaps you could shut off your video. I know sometimes if you don't have a great connection, if you shut off your video, the audio comes over better.
Sure, then you won't see the glare off my head. Okay, so these vulnerable birds include double-crested cormorants, green heron, black-crowned night heron, osprey, herring gulls, great black-backed gulls, common terns, spotted sandpipers, and American oyster catchers. And in fact, American oyster catchers have nested on the dumplings, and these birds only live in coastal intertidal regions and are very vulnerable to predators, storms, and human disturbance. Increased boat activity from the expansion of the boatyard will likely disrupt normal bird behavior, while increased vehicle traffic coming to and from the boatyard will reduce the tranquil conditions that encourage nesting birds in this part of Jamestown. The dumplings and the birds that nest there are under enough stress due to the existing boatyard, coastal storms, and climate change. We respectfully request the council opposes the proposed expansion, which will exacerbate negative impacts on Audubon's property. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Rurin. Before we continue on to our, I believe, 13th speaker, I just wanted to remind everyone that we had said at the last meeting that everyone would be limited to around 3 minutes. So if you do have something longer, if while you're waiting your turn, you can synthesize it a little bit. That will help us move through the meeting because we still have quite a bit more to get through. Thank you. Okay, Ryan?
Next is Trudy Cox.
Are you going to, oh, good. Okay,
Nice background.
well, thank you. It's Cuba.
Nice.
My name is Trudy Cox, and I am a Jamestown resident, a property owner, and a taxpayer. 3 generations of my family have swum here, boated, fished, and walked the area. And there is no place anywhere in Rhode Island quite like the dumplings. And it is your job, the job of the council, to help us protect it. I want to start out by saying, Madam Chair, that I was a bit surprised when the council asked us to restrict our remarks to our personal experiences of the Cove. I have been to hundreds and hundreds of public hearings in my life, and I have never heard that before. I've been to hearings because I'm the former Secretary of Environmental Affairs for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and in that role, I chaired the MWRA, the renowned Boston Harbor Cleanup. I'm the former Director of Ocean and Coastal Resource Management under NOAA. That was the agency that oversaw CRMCs like yours. And I am a former director of Save the Bay. So contrary to your request, my remarks go beyond the personal. In hearing the testimony so far, it is clear that this project cannot receive approval from CRMC. When there are unresolved property issues, when there are unresolved zoning issues, when there is a pattern of non-compliance with zoning, and it appears no repercussions at all because of this non-compliance, when testimony from 2 distinguished marine scientists, and actually there have been more tonight, Drs. Driscoll, Drs. Cormier, Chris Powell, others warn us about the levels of the toxic pollutant TBT and strongly advise that more testing must be done, when despite the Jamestown Council's resolution to have a traffic study done, there is none, and traffic certainly needs to be managed, when the Jamestown Conservation Commission opposed this project, and when the fragile eelgrass of the area is at risk, and then finally, when the Dumplings Cove is at its max, at its limit, overused, at a point where enough is enough, the issue tonight really is about whether the council, the agency charged with balancing competing uses of the bay, and you've already heard plenty about the current fragile imbalance that exists there now. The question is whether the council has the guts to say, stop, enough, this proposal cannot go forward. I am very puzzled as a former federal and state government official as to how government over the years allowed the shipyard to grow to the extent that it has, essentially unstopped and overtaxing the area. And I am finally really amazed that this application is before you at all, given the many dangling issues still hanging out there. You do not have enough information to make a regulatory decision that could change the cove forever. So I am asking you tonight to stop this project, and I thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Cox.
Next is Jim Wharton.
Mr. Wharton?
I don't see him in the room either.
Okay, so let's skip him for now and remind me when we finish with the list to go back to him.
Okay, next would be Andrew Potter.
Okay, can you hear me all right?
We can.
Okay, thank you. My name's Andrew Potter, and some of the earliest memories of my life are swimming at the Dumplings Dock when I visited my grandmother in the early 1960s. I moved back to Jamestown in 2010, and I swim at the Dumplings every day in the summer, from Memorial Day, well, through about now, mid-October. In 2006, I had back surgery, spinal fusion, nasty stuff. I do not recommend it. And swimming is the best exercise and therapy. The colder the water is, the better. And think about it, cold water compression, it reduces inflammation. You get a weightless, gentle, uniform resistance workout. It's great cardio for the heart and lungs. It's excellent. And for my particular condition, it's a godsend. So I try to swim a half mile or more every day. I watch out for boat traffic, but they don't always watch out for me. In 2011, my swimming route took me from the dock due north to the closest dumpling. Then I headed east towards Clingstone, along a line of dumplings, both above and below water, almost to Bull Point. Then I'd swing back closer to shore and around again. The route took me through the mooring field several times. One day on this route, I was approached by the JBY launch, who stopped me and inquired why I was out in the mooring field. I said, "I'm swimming. Watch where you're going. We'll be fine." The launch left and I continued on. A couple minutes later, another vessel came by and again challenged me on my swimming location. And I again said, "I'm swimming. Watch where you're going. We'll be fine. Leave me alone." I then realized that I was speaking with the harbor master. It seems that the JBY launch complained to the harbor master and he came over to reprimand me. But I maintained my right to swim in these waters. Now these days, I swim in shallow water because I don't trust all boaters. But at low tide, I can't get over the eelgrass. So I swim between the dock and Bull Point, short passages between the moored vessels to avoid the increasing traffic of sailboats and powerboats. And this is the same area that I got pulled over by the JBY launch and the harbor master. It's getting very, very crowded out there in the dumplings, even in shallow water, which saw more tie-ups and raft-ups this year than ever before. These are not great conditions for a safe harbor. I'm very concerned that the influx of larger and more boats will seriously and negatively impact my health and safety as I continue to swim these waters. These public waters are to be equitably shared by all, as guaranteed by law. So I strenuously oppose any expansion of the Safe Harbors Jamestown Boatyard. Thank you for listening.
Next is Mr. James Taylor.
Hi, thank you, Madam Chair. My name is James Taylor. My wife Kim and I are newcomers to the Dumplings, just finishing our new house at number 28 Dumplings Drive. The CRMC set strict limits on what we were allowed to build, Almost 2/3 of our small lot was designated wetland, and we had to go back to the drawing board repeatedly to obey the CRMC restrictions. I understand that these requirements and restrictions are there to protect us all, and I agree enthusiastically with your mission to protect our environment. But having been expected to obey these standards to the letter, it would be galling, to say the least, to see JBY and safe harbors get away with flaunting those same protective measures that the rest of us must follow. The parking for the boatyards is already overflowing, and the safety and environmental issues are real and serious. Please hold them to the same standards of responsibility to their neighbors, the Narragansett Bay, and the environment that the rest of us are expected to honor. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Next is Will Laurie.
Hello all. My name is William Laurie, and being in my mid-20s, I represent myself, my sisters, and the newest generation of my family, which has spent every summer in Jamestown in the dumplings for over 80 years. I've been a lifeguard for the Dumplings Association, and I'm a direct abutter of Safe Harbor's recently purchased Jamestown Boatyard. I urge the CRMC Council to oppose this expansion of the JBY's docks and dredging. The idea of the expansion of the docks made my late father, David Laurie, ill, and we often spoke about the negative effect it would have on the beautiful scenery that the Dumplings currently provides. Every year, the Dumplings area increases with people and Bethel. We've watched the swimming area at Dumplings Dock decrease, the cove becoming increasingly filled with larger yachts, and the water is becoming significantly less safe. Having larger boats will impact the beautiful scenery and the sensitive ecosystem we currently share at Dumplings Cove, as well as increase the risk to paddleboarders, kayakers, fishers, deep sea divers, and swimmers. JBY is not expanding to benefit the local residents of Rhode Island, nor to service their existing clients, of which the majority have not requested nor require additional dock space nor dredging. Let's be honest, they want to expand to attract and service more transit, larger yachts. Just to my north lies Clark's Boatyard, a locally owned and operated full-service boatyard since 1934. Clark's mooring field has similar sized boats up to 65 feet. Clark's dock is significantly smaller than JBY's, and in season, they service boats while on their mooring, like many boatyards with similar conditions. Ed McGurl is a lifetime Jamestown resident and launch captain at Clark's. Prior to this, he held 2 consecutive 3-year terms on Jamestown's Harbor Commission. Ed shared his concerns that dredging would not be a one-time operation. He said the fetch is much more robust in the East Passage and will move sediment in that area that has been dredged. The boat ramps at Clark's Boatyard need to be cleared constantly as the sediment builds up quickly with tidal flow. The current in this area, accentuated by ebbs and flow tides, also affects the sea bottom. Ed expresses concerns on the intent and does not feel expansion is necessary for continued operations at JBY. Clearly, the original plan of 270 feet was to attract Safe Harbor. When met with huge opposition from residents, they receded to their current plan, which they now plan to ram through, if you allow them. Why is it that we have one neighboring marina boatyard that respects the nature boundaries and is able to prosper, yet another that wants to reconfigure Mother Nature to meet their financial needs? Ed further reminded me that the RI state constitution states that Rhode Island shall protect the natural environment of the people of the state by providing adequate resources, planning for the control and the regulation of the use of the natural resources of the state for the preservation, regeneration, and restoration of the natural environment of the state. I asked the CRMC Council to oppose expansion of JBY's dock, not only for us, but rather the generations that come afterwards. Thank you for your consideration.
Peter Converse is next.
Thank you very much. My name is Peter Converse. I'm a lifelong visitor and now permanent resident of Jamestown, and have lived on Connecticut Island off and on since 1983. I've sailed these waters my entire life and also have spent considerable time on the shoreline. Thank you for allowing us this opportunity to voice our experiences and concerns regarding Safe Harbor Jamestown Boatyard's application. I've learned a great deal from these deliberations, but I'm still left with many questions. The only point I wish to further emphasize is my observation that any expansion of Safe Harbor JBY is unwarranted simply due to its strain on equal utilization to all in this unique and compact yet diverse environment. I believe pause is warranted given the many unanswered questions brought about by the public at large. It should be noted, as has been alluded to before, due to its shallow waters and bottleneck into East Patches Channel, this area experiences the strongest tidal ebb within Narragansett Bay. My single anecdote for tonight is my witness to a beamy 45-foot lobster boat being sideswept by current just last month. Prior to setting traps, about 40 to 50 traps within the dumplings, the captain had to back down the vessel and alter course in order to avoid collision between rocks and a boat. Just another example of how the overcrowded mooring field inhibits other marine commerce and recreation. Moving on, I was struck by the claim last week that Safe Harbor JBY has no slips. I don't believe this to be accurate. I've known several slip holders over the years, including as recently as last summer. Further, I'd like to know if Safe Harbor Jamestown Boatyard is currently in compliance with construction of a beach deck adjacent to its dock. From a 2011 satellite photo, there is no presence of this dock, yet we can clearly see its existence today. Above and beyond the fact that this deck is likely to have been built on land owned by the late family of David Laurie, was the structure permitted by CRMC in the first place? I've searched all Jamestown Boatyard CRMC applications going back to April of 2008 and have found none that request construction of a recreational deck adjacent to this dock. This includes a March 2011 request to break up concrete within that same area and replace only with a new walkway. Along with most others, I'm not opposed to the presence of JBY. It's been there my entire life, and I regard its staff and patrons as neighbors and friends. I know some of them personally. I only wish to preserve the marine habitat within its current form without further degradation. Work on larger vessels can easily be performed at any number of other safe harbor locations nearby. New England Boats Work, which is also an authorized Nodder's Swan Service boatyard, JBY can continue to work on boats which the Cove can accommodate without the need of continually dredging and expansion. Councilors, we ask that you reject this proposal in its entirety, and thank you for hearing all of us tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Converse.
Next is Victoria Corey.
Can you see me?
We can.
Awesome. All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Madam Chairman and Councilman. My name is Victoria Jones Corey. I am the owner of Fuller Art and Frame Gallery here in Jamestown, a lifelong resident of the Dumplings and a professional artist. So many generations of families have raised their children on these shores, as I was lucky enough. As a child, we rode our bikes down the dirt path to get to the beach and to crab off the jetty with the mussels and the strings. It's been a great life. Now as an adult, I get to spend my time standing on the shores and painting the most historic and beautiful views that Dumplings Cove has to offer. Narragansett Bay is a beautiful place, and like so many other artists before me, William Trust Richards, Catherine Wharton Morris Wright, Evelyn Rhodes, Richard Grosvenor, the list goes on, have all stood on the shores of the Dumplings to capture this amazing and beautiful coastline of Rhode Island, unobstructed. unobstructed from the boats, the machinery, and everything else. It's important to preserve that for the next generation. Really is. Any expansion of the safe harbor Jamestown Boatyard will surely create visual barriers to the bay, obstructing the views and all that deserve to see this beautiful area. Dumplings Drive is a tree-lined, very residential road, dirt road, that many families use recreationally. We have people who walk, we have people who ride their bikes, we have families, grandparents walking their grandkids down to the beach. So many people using this road, excuse me. And now with the expansion and with what's going on, it's already on both sides of the road lined with cars, people at the boatyard, people getting work done. It's become impassable. It's become almost unsafe for the common walker, the Jamestown resident, or the person coming to visit these shores that are deeded to them. Some deeded and some coming to visit the shores that are allowed to be given to them by the Constitution of Rhode Island. They should have clear, safe access to these shores. And it's getting to the point where it isn't safe to travel down Dumplings Drive. Cars are coming down, boats are in the way, shipping machinery. We really need to preserve this residential space for residential use. Expansion of any kind will degrade these historic and picturesque views and put locals in harm's way. It will sacrifice safety and destroy the visual landscape that Jamestown families, artists, and public have treasured for generations. Commissioners, please reject the Safe Harbors Jamestown Boatyard expansion. This land was meant to be residential. It was meant to be enjoyed by everyone. Please, it's time to preserve the amazing space that we all get to call home. It's the dumplings. Please reject this. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Corey.
Next is Bertram Lippincott.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Bert Lippincott. I'm a fifth-generation Dumplings neighborhood property owner, Jamestown resident, founding member and vice chair of the Jamestown Conservation Commission, professional genealogist, and historian. Marine artist William Trost Richards, who lived from 1833 to 1905, was from Philadelphia, one of the first, if not the first, purchaser of land in the Ocean Highlands Platte. He built his cottage, Gray Cliff, in 1882 on the cliffs located in the middle of what is modern-day Fort Wetherill. He loved the rocky coast of Jamestown because it reminded him of the Channel Islands and Cornwall, England, where he painted extensively and perfected his craft. World-renowned artists Richards, James Braid Sword, and John Frederick Kensett produced numerous works on the Jamestown coast. The southwestern coast of Jamestown was taken by the War Department for the construction of Fort Wetherill. Fort Wetherill. In preparation of that event, Richards conceived of building clingstone on one of the Dumplings rocks. He hired J.D. Johnson of Newport to design the cottage with a 360-degree view of the bay and the coast. The house was completed in 1905 when ownership was assumed by Joseph Samuel Lovering Wharton, who also had lost a cottage to the condemnation for Fort Wetherill. Richards died in Newport that year at the age of 72. Joseph Samuel Wharton was the nephew of Joseph Wharton, who owned Horsehead, famed industrialist. Wharton's son Charles operated the shipyards in the Dumplings until his death in November of 1974. Wharton's shipyards served the Clingstone cottage as well as boats of neighbors, friends, and relatives. Upon the death of Charles Wharton, Wharton's shipyard was sold. slowly grew, and soon became an authorized swan repair facility at a time when 40-foot vessels were huge. The area was converted from a small boatyard to an industrial site with non-conforming sheds, temporary tents, and heavy machinery with questionable town and state permitting. As a lifelong boater and member of the Cottrell Pier Association and former member of the Dumplings Association, I and my family have enjoyed this beautiful and pristine waters of Dumplings Cove, despite the proliferation of moorings and large yachts awaiting servicing by Jamestown Boat Yard. Navigation through these waters has always been tricky because of rock outcroppings and submerged reefs. Now you have to squeeze between large moored vessels with their own swing radius in fluctuating currents and tides. Boats arrive and depart the area at a high speeds, dodging swimmers of all ages, kayakers, and paddleboarders. I strongly object to the proposed expansion of docks and floats into the waters of Dumplings Cove. It will be a taking of public waters, public navigable waters that have been enjoyed by the public for centuries. We should not be subject to the expansion of a commercial shipyard which serves many absentee owner vessels from other parts of New England and beyond. The recent sale of the shipyard to a national conglomerate will eliminate all local knowledge, friendships, and understanding of local recreational marine behavior by boaters and swimmers alike. The expansions of docks and floats for commercial use cannot coexist with the recreational activities of the area enjoyed by residents and the public since at least the 1880s. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lippincott.
Next is Susanna Holloway.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Susanna Holloway. I am a tax-paying full-time resident of the state of Rhode Island and a United States citizen. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. I live in Barrington and swim in Narragansett Bay. I'm a member of the Bristol Yacht Club, and I sail in Narragansett Bay and swim in the Dumplings Cove. The coastal and estuarine resources of the state are important to me. I am appearing here only to object to this proceeding on the basis of a lack of subject matter jurisdiction and a violation of the CRMC's own hearing process, a violation of procedural and substantive due process under the United States Constitution, a violation of the Fifth Amendment's takings clause under the United States Constitution, and Nolan versus California. These are violations of the applicant's rights and violations of the Rhode Island public's rights. My objections rest on the basis that this council has not convened, where the members of the council are not physically present in one place altogether, and where the witnesses have not been properly sworn, where the swearing official was attempting to swear them remotely and no proper evidence has been taken or is being allowed. Where any constitutional and procedural rights have been implicated, there has been no due process. I wish to be personally served with the council's decision so that I can appeal and obtain judicial review. My address is 64 Fales, F as in Frank, A-L-E-S, Avenue, Barrington, Rhode Island, 02806. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Holloway.
Next is David Kane. I didn't see his name in the room, but I know there's a couple phone callers, so.
We can give him a short time to sign in. Is there a David Kane who would like to speak? Okay, let's do the same thing we did with Jim Wharton and park him for the moment, and we can come back.
I was informed Jim Wharton will not be speaking.
Okay.
Next would be Ann Kuhn.
Okay, hi. I'm Ann Kuhn, actually Ann Kuhn Hines with a hyphen H-I-N-E-S. It's not on my sign-in thing here. I'm the current Jamestown Conservation Commission Chair. I have a PhD in environmental science. You know, as not to be redundant and repeat concerns already detailed, we're referring the JCC, Jamestown Conservation Commission, are referring the council to our letters that we submitted, the first in August 2019 and another in January 2020. And these were responding to the first and second versions of the Jamestown Boatyard application. And since then, as we all know, the applications have been revised and downsized. These subsequent revisions have addressed some of our concerns, especially concerning scale and the extent of the proposed project. But, and they have reduced the dredging footprint and have, proposed to stay within the existing marina perimeter limits and avoid directly dredging in the eelgrass and shellfish beds. But however, the Conservation Commission, our biggest concern remains the healthy eelgrass beds directly adjacent to where the proposed dredging is. So, and our other concerns are detailed in these letters, but so as not to be redundant, just pointing, the council back to those letters. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you for summarizing that.
Next is Alexander Wharton.
We'll try that at a nap when someone's here.
Seem to have somebody else on here.
You're all set now.
My name's Alexander Wharton. I don't know. You can't see me, I guess, but I don't understand that. Anyway.
We can see you.
Good evening.
We can see you.
You can? Oh, okay. Good evening, and thank you for tolerating an old man's recollections and experiences. My reason for offering input to this application is to inform you not only of the history of the Dumplings Cove, but to also give you some insight into the conditions that can and will impact any marina at this location. My family has been party to this area since the late 1800s, when my great-grandfather began building the boatyard and the residence known as Clingstone. The boatyard back then, as you know, was called the Wharton Shipyard. Its purpose primarily was to maintain and build my great-grandfather's vessels. The shipyard also built and maintained wooden fishing boats for local fishermen and cared for boats moored in the area. Upon the death of my great-grandfather, the shipyard was operated and owned by Charles Wharton, my great-uncle, who continued building, mooring, maintaining, and storing boats up to about 40 feet. My association with the shipyard became quite intense as time passed. I ended up working at the yard, building, maintaining boats, being the rigger, being the on-site diver, setting and maintaining moorings and docks, and hauling and launching boats. I also sailed from and for the shipyard for years. Prior to the shipyard, I raced small boats, sailed Long Island Sound to the Vineyard, raced numerous offshore races, and was a captain for Patrick Ellum Incorporated out of Larchmont, New York, which was an international yacht delivery business. In conversations with my grandfather, Joseph Wharton, and his brother, Charlie, I learned quite a bit about the shipyard and the Dumplings area, and I think that the knowledge they provided might be of interest to CRMC with respect to this application. One important point is the special vulnerability of this location to storms. especially ones out of the Northeast. The 1938 hurricane is largely legendary for its destructive impact. At Wharton Shipyard, the engine hatch from a boat hauled out at the shipyard was found behind Beaver Tail Light. 2 small boats were found on Greens Beach off Ocean Drive in Newport, and there were fish found on the second balcony of Clingstone, which is more than 30 feet above sea level. Hurricane Carol in the 50s also did some extensive damage to this part of Jamestown coast. But this shipyard is highly vulnerable, not just to the most powerful hurricanes, but to strong northeasterly storms in general. During such intense storms, it was, and I imagine should still be common, for water to flood all the way back to the captain's house behind the shipyard, this being a home at 14 Newport Street. We would prepare the old building, which still exists at the boatyard, for hurricanes and nor'easters by opening up the doors on the east and west ends so that the waves could go through without destroying the building. We could also raise the machinery in the building to the ceiling of the first floor so that the seawater would not damage it. This threat of storm waters is the reason that the wooden building's first floor is raised up above grade as high as it is. During a nor'easter in the late 1960s, a gravel barge broke its mooring at the Newport Bridge construction and ended up between the Dumpling Stone Pier and the Wharton Shipyard dock during the night. The barge was probably 40 by 130 and drew about 8 feet. Its bow was at least halfway down the length of the stone pier and out of the water at low tide. The barge was more than half full of gravel for concrete, so the bridge owner brought a crane with a clamshell bucket to the Dumplings Pier, placed a bulldozer in the barge, and offloaded the gravel to trucks so that 2 tugs could pull the barge free. If I recall correctly, we had about 5 feet of water and waves over the road during the storm based on the flotsam on Dumplings Drive near the start of Newport Street. I do not believe that any of the current boats hauled out at the boatyard on poppets would be upright after a storm like that. How can these conditions be possible? If the conditions are right, it can and does happen. If there is a full moon and the tide is high and the tide changes to the ebb and you have severe northeasterly winds above 50 knots, the conditions can be just right. The distance between Hog Island and Jamestown Boatyard is a bit more than 11 miles of open water. We will call that the fetch. We then have winds of above 50 knots or so for 40 minutes. The waves can grow to 0.97 meters, from 0.97 meters to 1.6 meters at the boatyard. These calculations were made by entering the numbers into 2 online wave height calculators. On top of that, we have the wind-driven flood tide and shallow waters in the Dumplings. You then have a storm surge at the boatyard because of the storm conditions and the mouth of the bay and the East Passage being confined between Bull Point in the Dumplings and Hammersmith Farm on the Newport side. Navigational issues are also of special concern in the area. During and prior to my association with Wharton Shipyard, the waters inside the Dumplings rocks were frequently navigated by vessels coming to and from Jamestown. These vessels would round Bull Point, go inside of Clingstone and the Dumplings and up ashore to town. We always tried to keep a channel open, although at times moored boats would hang at all sorts of angles depending on the wind and tide, and these boats' size and type. Yachtsmen would frequently sail through. They would also pick up their moorings under sail in the yard. These uses would be unreasonable with the currently proposed changes and may be already. This proposal's relationship to eelgrass bed is the third consideration. Please look at the most recent Google Maps satellite view of 16 Dumplings Drive. The greenish tint in the water on this flat, calm day indicates what I believe to be eelgrass in different locations than what is delineated on page 1 and 2 of the Submerged Aquatic Vegetation Survey accompany this application. This satellite picture appears to have been taken in the spring of 2020, judging from the words Google 2020 printed on the water and map data 2020 at the bottom of the picture. And in fact, and the fact that there are boats stored and covered and as yet no leaves on the tree. In order to see detail, you need to look at an image of a large screen. You can see directly north of the shipyard dock, a straight line to the north as the limit of the eelgrass. Then there is an obviously man-made arc which transitions to an easterly line. This delineation is outside the marina designation line if JBY's drawings are to be believed. You can see that the boatyard operations are impacting the eelgrass. The complexity of the tidal flow in this area is an important part of the eelgrass environment. The tidal flow is not in the simple north-south direction shown on race engineering drawings. Instead, there are many eddies around rocks and in the area south and below the house called the Barnacle, owned by the late David Laurie. All this tidal flow contributes to and is essential to the health of the eelgrass beds in the area. The eelgrass used to be more extensive prior to expansions that have occurred at this boatyard. The expansion and additional use of the boatyard should diminish the eelgrass beds further. Also, of much importance to consider is the movement of the seafloor sediment in the area. When I worked at the shipyard, the end of the tracks of the marine railway would frequently be covered with silt, which we would flush off with a hose. Based on this observation of frequent siltation, the proposed dredging seems to be somewhat unrealistic. If it is done between October and January, I would think that the dredged area would be considerably silted in the following summer. Also, the dredging will alter the tidal flow affecting the eelgrass areas. Specifically, the ebb and flow should create a small hydraulic south and north of the north and south dredge limit. This would result in a small amount of silt moving in both directions, and it should not take much to destroy the eelgrass. Finally, the reasonableness of the current proposal should also be looked at carefully. The application referenced boats of around 60 feet using the proposed slips. The boatyard caters to Northrop Swan yachts, being an authorized Northrop Swan service yard. Before you make your final decision on this application, please look at the Jamestown Boatyard website. Go to jby.com. On the drop-down header, go to Swan Services. Please look at the size of the swans that JBY claims to have worked on. Also look at the drop-down menu for hauling and storage. JBY claims to be able to haul boats up to 75 feet. The boat name Viking being hauled in the photo is a Swan 61, which draws 9.67 feet. A Swan 60 has a draught of 11.81 feet. This yacht could not safely utilize a slip with a proposed dredge depth of 10 feet at mean low water. A Swan 58 draught with standard keel is 8.86 feet. With a performance keel, it's 11.81 feet. A plan to service some such deeper draught swans is like opening Pandora's box to more abuse. Jamestown Boatyard will no doubt rotate bigger boats like Swans 98 into the dock in the same way that they said they do now, which is by using higher states of tide. None of this makes any sense when there are full service yards owned by safe harbors across the bay that are capable of maintaining and hauling the largest swans manufactured to date. These facilities are the Newport Shipyard and New England Boat Works, which is also an authorized swan service yard. I have visited many boatyards and marinas over the years. Many were small and confined by the same type of limitations as the Jamestown Boatyard. These smaller facilities flourished because they provided high quality services to the vessels that they were able to safely accommodate. My personal opinion is that the expansion of the Jamestown Boatyard is simply an effort to accommodate larger swan yachts. Perhaps this is desired to maintain the yard's status as a Naughter Swan service yard. But this is also an excuse to make more money at the expense of the area that is inherently unsafe for a marina of this size and is inappropriately considered the environment impact and historic use of the waters which this expansion would intrude upon. The Dumplings Association has the right to have its use of the Dumplings Cove protected so that they can enjoy the waters in the ways they have since way before, well, since the Wharton Shipyard existed. More and more, the commercial interests have been allowed to prevail, and this is just plain wrong. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you for all that detailed information. Mr. Moore?
If David Kane is here, other than that, the list has been completed.
Okay, so we said that we would allow at this point the applicant's counsel to speak to address any of the public comments or attorney arguments or comments made at our last meeting. So I'll give that opportunity to them now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hope I can be heard.
Yes, we can hear you and see you, Mr. DeAngelis.
Thank you. I'm very pleased this evening to step in for my colleague, Christian Infantolino. He's doing a couple of other Zoom meetings in the adjoining room, and he has asked me to summarize the matter that's pending before the council. Listening for the last couple of evenings to the opinions being expressed by members of the public, I am reminded of an oft-quoted rule that we are a nation of laws and not of men. I think that's what makes our state, this agency, and our nation so unique. The law in this case is what is commonly referred to as the Red Book, the CRMC program. I just want to quote a couple of sections from the Red Book relating to Type 3 high-intensity boating regulations. I think this is the most relevant and salient portion of that Red Book. Under policies, it states that the council's goal is to preserve, protect, and where possible, enhance Type 3 areas for high-intensity boating and the services that support this activity. Other activities and alterations will be permitted to the extent that they do not significantly interfere with recreational boating activities or values. The program goes on. The highest priority uses of Type 3 waters and adjoining land areas within the council jurisdiction are, and I quote, boat yards and other businesses that service recreational boaters. As I stated, it seems to me that the duty of this council is to weigh the facts that have been presented by the many engineers and consultants employed by the applicant, reviewed by your senior engineer, Mr. Goulet, and then come to a conclusion which I respectfully suggest is to approve this fairly simple application. As Mr. Goulet stated, this application would most likely have resulted in an administrative approval, but for the objections offered, and rightfully so. We're here to listen to the members of the public who have an opinion to offer. I would like to address just two issues that were raised by Counsel Shea on behalf of his client, and those two issues are the issue of sediment disturbance that was raised by Dr. Cormier. Dredging projects go on in the state of Rhode Island each and every year. Only last year, the Portsmouth boatyard did a dredge of more than 25,000 cubic yards. This dredge, as you know, is for a much smaller amount, about 10% of that dredge. The comments made by Dr. Cormier intended to illustrate that dredging may have an effect on eelgrass. And I think the operative term there is may, because her written report, which was submitted in advance, contains the word may throughout. The CRMC staff has been ever protective of the eelgrass resources in our state. And looking at the history of dredging that has been taking place in our state each and every year, if there was an illustration that could be made of damage being done to eelgrass by dredging, I think clearly the objectives would have brought that forward, and CRMC staff would have reacted to it. The second issue, and I'll try to move this along, is the issue raised by TBT. As a slang, I would say this is the red herring that's been thrown on the desk. Mr. Goulet succinctly pointed out that the only study that has been done on this issue was the December 2018 dredge material evaluation and disposal procedures that was done in Seattle, Washington. It was a study commissioned by the EPA, the Washington State Department of Natural Resources, and the United States Army Corps of Engineers. That study, as Mr. Goulet pointed out, noted that a TBT finding of 73, and I'll give you the letters because I'm not a scientist, UG/KG, should raise a concern in terms of a sediment sample. The objectors took 2 core samples in this area. One of them showed no TBT. The other one, as Mr. Goulet pointed out, noted a TBT finding of 16, clearly below what the only study in our nation has pointed to be a level of some concern. Most importantly, there are no EPA, Army Corps of Engineers, or DEM limits on TBT. In my humble and non-professional opinion, it is amazing to me that a boatyard that has existed here for 117 years would have TBT levels that are as low as the objectives analysis have determined. Moreover, as Mr. Goulet pointed out to the members of the council, the soil samples just missed beach nourishment standard, which I understand to be the highest standard to be granted to soils and sediment removed in a dredging operation. I think he also said that the soil extracted from this area could be used for an upland playground. But it's not going to be used for an upland playground. It's going to be delivered to the CAD cell approved by the state and the Department of Environmental Management, and hopefully it'll lie there in peace. So I think I've covered the major issues raised by the objectives. I respectfully request that the council keep in mind the rule of law in this case. It is your red book, it is your Bible, and it is the document that we all should follow because those are the rules, and we are a nation of laws and not of men. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. DeAngelis. Any questions from council members for Mr. DeAngelis? Okay, thank you. I think we did have a request from Attorney Shea that we need to consider. Mr. Shea, are you there?
I am, Madam Chair. Thank you very much. Honorable members, thank you. This morning, I delivered a letter to CRMC requesting the opportunity to reopen the testimony of Dr. Susan Driscoll as it relates to the toxin TBT, of which we've just heard from Attorney DeAngelis. As we know, Dr. Driscoll is an aquatic toxicologist, and TBT is a highly toxic substance found to be present in samples taken at the boatyard in this matter. Dr. Driscoll will testify briefly with respect to the appropriate TBT screening as it relates to that used by CRMC staff. This topic was discussed at last week's hearing. You will recall Dr. Driscoll advised that she would like to look into the matter a little further and has done so. Dr. Driscoll has prepared a short statement with respect to this matter. Because the statement is so short, any inconvenience to the council should be quite minimal. We believe it important for the council to have the most updated information on this toxin. If the council chooses not to reopen Dr. Driscoll's testimony, a copy of her statement has been filed with the council. It also includes the backup documentation that she relied upon for her opinion. We would ask that that be made a part of the record and that it be reviewed prior to any decision being rendered. In the meantime, though, I would request that Dr. Driscoll's testimony be reopened and that she present a very, very short statement before this hearing closes. Thank you.
Mr. Willis, did you receive the request earlier today, and do you want to address that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I did receive a request from Attorney Shea to reopen Dr. Driscoll's testimony, and I replied to Attorney Shea that given the lateness of the request and the ability of staff to actually have a chance to review it was, in my opinion, unreasonable, and that I would recommend to the council that it not be reopened if that's your decision. Justin Shea, Attorney Shea, excuse me, subsequently sent me the backup materials that he has just mentioned, and it's quite voluminous. And so I reiterated the position of the lateness of the request and the amount of material that staff might have to sift through to understand what the testimony would try to support was just too much for me to recommend to you as the council that that the testimony of the doctor be reopened. So that would be my recommendation, Madam Chair.
What are the management procedures rule on submission of materials prior to hearing?
Sure, management procedures are quite clear in that the council for 5 business days prior to a hearing needed to get a list of expert witnesses and their testimony and materials thereto. And we received these today for this hearing tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Willis. Either Mr. DeSisto or Longo, would you like to comment on that?
No, that's accurate. Jeff has detailed what the management procedures are for practice before the council. This came in the day of this hearing, and I agree with the statements that he's made.
Okay, and how should we handle that? Do we need to take a vote on it? Do I address it procedurally? How would you advise?
I tell you what, have the council take a vote as to whether or not either of the 2 requests that Mr. Shea has made before the board tonight. Number 1, allow the witness to testify, reopen her testimony to testify, or in the alternative, accept whatever written statements that she has to be part of the record, which if there's an appeal would be considered by a court. even though not so during this hearing. So I would ask you to call for a vote on both requests as to whether or not they're accepted.
Okay, with respect to the short statement, just a clarification, we wouldn't consider, it's either or, so we wouldn't consider any written materials with that. It would just be additional testimony.
That's correct, yes.
All right. Okay, so everyone's heard Mr. Willis and Mr. DeSisto's comments on that. I would ask for a motion to either let in the short statement without the backup, or the written statement with the backup, or nothing at all.
Chair,
Mr. Gomez.
I would move that we deny, based on the legal opinion and the director's statement, I would move that we deny both testimony and acceptance of the written material.
Okay, is there a second of that?
A second, Ron Gagnon.
Mr. Gagnon, second. Any discussion? I guess I would just comment that to exclude it would be consistent with our management procedures, which are clear and have been in effect for the duration of Mr. Shea's representation of his client. So I think he had fair notice of that, and I would support the motion to deny. Any other comments? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to go through the roll call on the pending motion to deny. Ray Koya.
Ray Koya votes no. Madam Chair, I would have allowed the brief statement.
Okay. Mike Hudner.
I approve the motion to deny.
Thank you. Don Gomez.
Don Gomez, aye.
Ron Gagnon.
Ron Gagnon, aye.
Patricia Reynolds.
Patricia Reynolds, aye.
And myself, Jennifer Cervenka, aye. So that's 5-1. The motion to deny carries.
Thank you for consideration, Madam Chair and honorable members.
Thank you, Mr. Shea. Okay, I think that this concludes public comments, rebuttal, Mr. Shea's additional request. Anything further, Mr. DeSisto, that we need to consider before we close the public comment period?
No, I'll have some comments though after you close the public hearing.
I was going to ask for those. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to close the public hearing now, and this will be our time for deliberation and discussion. We'll start with you, Mr. DeSisto. I do have some questions for you, but if you would like to start, I'll see if you cover the same things.
Yeah, I just want to mention one thing before you begin deliberations. Although I wasn't at the last meeting, I do think it was appropriate to state that the personal observations of those from the public that spoke either for or against this application, that's appropriate under the case of Restivo versus Lynch. Basically what that case stands for is the proposition that when lay testimony is received by an administrative body such as this one, in order for that testimony to be considered in light of expert testimony that is countervailing, the lay witness needs to articulate the personal bases on which their opinions lie. So I do think that I understand that there was a comment made about that, but I can tell you that it's settled law in Rhode Island under the case of Restivo versus Lynch, that if you consider the testimony of the public, the fact that they relied upon their personal observations makes it probative and relevant evidence under the law.
Yeah, and I can address that further, that when that was stated, I believe I asked that the public focus on their personal experiences and knowledge. I didn't say that they were excluded from anything else. And I asked for that because I agree that that type of comment is probative for this council. You know, it goes to the wane of the interest, whether or not there's an impact. So I felt that personally to be relevant to our consideration. But it was not my intent to exclude other things. I just thought that was particularly relevant.
Correct.
I have another question for you that was raised by one woman about the appropriateness of the Zoom platform or procedure that we are conducting our meeting through. And, you know, whether or not it's a violation of due process to not all be sitting in the same room and to have people sworn, you know, virtually. And we have the governor's orders on this point allowing that. And that was referenced at the beginning of our, both of our Zoom meetings on the 20th and tonight. But I just wanted to hear you comment upon that if you had any comments.
I do, yes. In light of the fact that this public health emergency is still ongoing, the governor declared a public emergency under her statutory authority earlier this year. Unfortunately, that is continuing. The governor has issued several executive orders under her statutory authority to manage a public health crisis such as this. Several of those orders were directed towards the state's Open Meetings Act and how public bodies such as the Coastal Resources Management Council conduct business, public business, in such a way as to protect the health and safety of the public. The governor has authorized that these types of meetings, particularly ones where there is this type of a robust public interest and public participation, to be done on a Zoom platform. Her order essentially amended the Open Meetings Act to allow for this, and also to allow for the use of remote swearing in of witnesses. So this, and I'm sure there's going to be a challenge, but this meeting, as your other meetings, have been done under the aegis of that law, of that governor's executive order, which springs from her statutory authority, which is wholly appropriate in light of the ongoing public health crisis.
Thank you, Mr. DeSisto. A couple more things. We talked about this at the last meeting, but it's been brought up again about the property ownership issue and whether or not there is a question as to ownership or boundaries here. And we noted at the last meeting that the jurisdiction to make that determination is vested exclusively with the Superior Court. I just wanted to confirm that with you tonight.
That's correct. Under Section 9-2-14 of the general laws, the Rhode Island Superior Court has original jurisdiction over all matters pertaining to the title and interest in real estate. That authority is not vested in any administrative body. So to the extent that there's an issue as to property ownership, that needs to be addressed in the Superior Court. If a lawsuit has been filed in Superior Court as to a ownership interest that is relevant or would impact this application, that would be one thing. But if there is no lawsuit on it, you need to proceed on that. And if there is a question, wherever that comes from needs to be filed in Newport County Superior Court.
Okay. Thank you. And then as to the zoning violations that have been raised, that should be something that this council takes into consideration in their deliberations. I've addressed it previously, is that's not something that we consider. Is that correct?
You can consider the zoning violation in connection with this application.
You can.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Under the case of Warren versus White House, there is actually a line between the jurisdiction between coastal and local zoning authority, and that stops at the mean high water mark. So that's not something that can be considered in connection with this application. Again, that's something that would take place with other bodies, not in the purview of the Coastal Resources Management Council.
Okay. I think that's all the questions that I have for you on legal issues. Any other council members have questions for Mr. DeSisto? And just to confirm, we are processing this application as a Category B application, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, even though there were modifications made after it was filed that would have made it a Category A, we still treat it as a Category B.
That's correct, yes.
And for our purposes, it may not make much of a difference because the same standards should be applicable, because in Category B, there's a specific iteration of the different things that have to be considered and the balancing of the interests. In the Category A, it says that all applicable standards have to be considered. So, you know, I don't know if there's much of a difference in any event.
I understand that there's a relation a relation back from A to B for matters of this nature, but I do think it's appropriate to consider the Category B standards in connection with the decision on this application, just based on the procedural travel of the case.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. DeSisto. I have a couple of questions for Mr. Goulet.
Yes, Madam Chair.
There were a couple of issues raised. One, the surprise of why there wouldn't be a biologist report in addition to your engineering report. Would you please address that?
Yes, Madam Chair. There was a biologist. It was actually Mr. Reese who reviewed this application with me. Once the dredging footprint was reduced to the marina perimeter limit and avoided all the impacts to eelgrass, it met our program, and therefore he didn't feel it was necessary for him to compile a report for that. It met the biological standards.
Okay, thank you. And then there was some discussion of a dredge window and whether or not the applicant would come back and that the CRMC would be able to allow dredging outside of a dredge window. I didn't quite follow that. Maybe you did, and you could explain that to the council.
Certainly. So dredging is allowed roughly between October 15th and January 31st. There's some minor variations in different locations. Previously, when Mr. Powell was the one who made those statements, there were some allowances for dredging outside of that window because there was a concern that there would be no locations for dredge material disposal. I don't. Any dredging outside of the dredging window is very, very limited, and there has to be a very compelling reason for it. Both DEM and it's DEM Fisheries who really make the call on that, not us. We accept their call. It would have to be a reason for a marina, just because a project in a sandy area filled in much quicker than they want, or there was a storm. That wouldn't be a compelling reason. They would still have an opportunity to dredge during the next appropriate dredge window. We would not allow them to dredge in May or June, simply for their convenience.
And this application seeks dredging within the appropriate dredging window, not outside of it. Is that right?
Correct. Essentially, DEM and ourselves, we dictate that they shall be within the dredge window.
Okay. Okay. Okay, those are all the questions I have for you, Mr. Goulet. Any other council members have questions that they have for Mr. Goulet or Mr. DeSisto?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Mr. Gagnon.
I just wanted to confirm that this application under the council rules is not an expansion. There were a lot of comments about an expanded marina, but we are not considering an expansion within this application. I just wanted to make sure that was the case here, and that's what we were looking at. So I guess Mr. DeSisto or Mr. Goulet could just confirm the application is dredging and not a marina expansion.
That should go to Mr. Goulet.
Yes, Mr. Gagnon, that is correct. Because there will be no change in the boat count, and they are, if the council so chooses, they would be expanding the existing docks within the existing marina perimeter limit. That wouldn't be considered a marina expansion.
Thank you, Mr. Goulet. And Mr. Gagnon, I just wanted to, in our discussion, to comment upon it that I do view the dredging differently from the pier extensions, the requested pier extensions, because of the testimony of the applicant's representative in our first meeting, who indicated that as a result of extending those piers, I think it would add approximately 4 more boats to the existing 6 boats that could be serviced with the existing structure. So I did view that as allowing for an expansion, because it wouldn't quite double the boats, but it will add boats. The dredging, as I understand from the applicant's representative, was desired so that they could just keep the boats that they were servicing on a full tide cycle. So that was to increase operational efficiency. So that one was to just, improve their existing operations. The other request seemed more geared to, fitting more boats on the piers per his testimony. So I don't know how you viewed that, if you want to comment on it.
No, I don't have a comment. I would
Okay.
refer it to staff.
Okay. Does anyone else want to comment on dredging specifically, or the pier expansion or pier extensions? So to just get back to that, that distinction, and I'm making an assumption. It's not an assumption. It's based on testimony of the applicant that there would be increased boats coming to the boatyard as a result of the extended piers. And there's an already existing condition in the cove that's been spoken to by 25 different people during the public comment period, that, you know, this is a very congested, conflict-ridden cove. And I find that persuasive, and I thought that there was ample comment based on personal knowledge that the existing conditions are challenging and difficult. And so I viewed the desire to bring in more boats through the pier extensions as exacerbating an already problematic set of conditions for the cove. And part of my reason of confirming that this is Category B application, we do have a set of standards that talk about conflicting uses. And it's a balancing act that we have to view the evidence through that lens. And we cannot permit an alteration that would unreasonably interfere with public access. We cannot allow something that would result in significant conflicts with other water dependent uses. And so if, as a result of the pier extension, we would have more boats coming in, I think that, you know, already there's a problematic set of conditions that it would exacerbate it. And I think, in my view, that standard has been met through all the public comment, that there would be a significant impact such that that's something that I don't know if I could support the pier extension. Now, the dredging aspect of it, as I heard from the testimony of the applicant, was for operational efficiency and to allow just the existing clients to stay at the piers through a full tide cycle, and that may have the effect of actually minimizing the back and forth, because the boats could be brought there and kept there as opposed to brought there, taken back out to a mooring, brought back, or the back and forth. If they can't bring it into the piers, they have to go work on it on the moorings. So I did not view that as something that would have a significant conflict with existing uses, because it really is just to help the boatyard with their existing operations. And so I was wondering what other people thought about those distinctions and how they view the two different requests.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Mr. Gomez.
I don't think it's necessarily all about additional boats. I think part of the rationale for pier extension was not only to allow them to be berthed there as opposed to going in and out of there while they're in a repair period, but I think it was discussed that it would accommodate larger boats, longer boats, and they needed the pier extension to work on today's longer and larger boats. I definitely agree. We've gone through the dredging and the toxicity and kind of settled those. I found those to be things that I really thought about, but it is all about the balance. And I spent almost 8 decades in my own town looking at balance shifts, and I became involved in many of them. The town grows, houses get bigger, people move in, people move out. We had to eliminate a high school because all our children were gone. We didn't have farms anymore with large numbers of students. So you adapt, things change and you have to adapt. When I come back and really think about the balance, and I might add that in my time on different boards and councils and things like that, we often looked at Jamestown as our sister city. We kind of came up the same. We were small. Jamestown probably still does, had a volunteer fire department. There were a whole bunch of little coastal town things that we shared in common. So I often looked at Jamestown when I was zoning boards, planning boards, town council, and say, you know, what did they do? But when I get back to the balancing issue, my take on it, balancing is subjective. In my opinion, it's subjective. And in this case, I look at balancing as being the marine perimeter limit. What we're trying to do is inside that limit, and I see that outside of that limit, I would have a definite problem. Inside that limit, I can accept it as a change that still produces a balance. So that's my thoughts on it.
Okay, good. Yes, Mr. Hudner.
Madam Chair, I agree with Don Gomez. I live in the same town, and things on the water, everybody wants to be there. It's congested. But this fact that there's an existing marina perimeter that is not being expanded, I mean, this seems to me this issue was settled some time ago as far as how that water could be used. And I think I would just remind everybody that one of the great contributors to the economy of Rhode Island is a combination of marine services that are available to out-of-state people and the appeal of Narragansett Bay, in particular the lower bay, Newport, Jamestown, to people from away for marine events, mostly regattas, but it is the sailing capital of the country. And I think it's after when the America's Cup was lost in 1983, it was a disaster. And it's important to do the balancing act in a way that keeps all this possible. I know it's not, I have problems in my own town. I can't get my boat into the harbor in our town, but I live with it because there are other places I can go to get to my boat or to keep my boat. So I think the balancing act in this case is within the marina, the existing marina perimeter, which was set up a long time ago, presumably to create a marina, to define a marina. So that's not under discussion here. So what goes on inside that perimeter, I don't see the fact that it may crimp the space available for people by going right by the pier there, the dock. I mean, we have these problems all over the place. Try to park a car. So I just think we shouldn't get too objective in deciding what's too crowded. I mean, these people are so fortunate to live on the water, and but there are people getting jobs, and there's a big economic engine attached to these marine services. So I think within reason, we should encourage it. And it seems to be clearly within the letter, within the rules of the Red Book. And I must say, I think the staff has done an extraordinarily professional job with all this, and they're to be complimented for that. And I think what they've done is consistent with the Red Book, and I'm in favor of approving it personally.
Yeah, I just comment on that. I don't disagree really with what has been written in the staff report and what Mr. Goulet has reported in this meeting. It's just, I feel that we've been given additional evidence as to user conflicts that were not necessarily available to Mr. Goulet as he's writing his report. So that was my attempt to reconcile his report and review with what I thought was some overwhelming evidence on user conflicts. And so I just wanted to be clear that, I took his report and then incorporated some more new info.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I wasn't any way inferring that you had some dispute with the work.
No. I just wanted to put that on the.
I appreciate that, but I want to be clear also. I think that the fact that this, I mean, having people who now want to sail through, paddle through, swim through the marina perimeter, I mean, that's almost like somebody saying, I've got a use easement over your property because I've been doing it for a while. And I don't get that. And I don't think that gives stability to the things we're trying to, we've got issues on the bay. One of them is aquaculture, where the rules are not clear as to what the balancing act is. I mean, we all know that. And so we're going to have to deal with that at some point. And here's an existing marina perimeter. And the fact that people have taken advantage of there being no docks in all of it to now claim a right to it, I don't think that's a healthy road to go down. And this project has been scaled back enormously from where it started. So it's not that either the staff or the applicant have been just taking a lot for granted. That doesn't seem to be the case at all. So that's how I see it.
Thank you, Mr. Hudner. Mr. Koya, would you like to comment on any of the discussion so far?
Other than that, I concur with what's been said. I mean, if this for discussion purposes of all of the evidence, this is one where we do have a lot of contradictory evidence in that you've got expert testimony proffered on behalf of the CRMC, our staff. We've got lay testimony put forth by the objectors. And to a point you raised earlier, much of the lay testimony was based upon personal experience, personal observation. However, some of the lay testimony givers are well credentialed. They weren't recognized as experts. However, many of them began their testimony citing credentials. So I did take their testimony seriously and gave it its due weight based on that. However, I think sometimes this is one of those where we're constrained by the laws. To quote Attorney DeAngelis, I mean, we're bound by the law as opposed to the men or the women that come forth with certain opinions that may be contradictory to the law. If we have to apply all of the evidence, if we take all of the collective evidence, both pro and against, and apply it to our standard of review, although some people may not agree with it, I think the evidence supports the expansion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Koya.
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Ms. Reynolds.
So when I think about it's not technically an expansion of the perimeter of the area, but it is an expansion in size of the boats, both by accommodation of the new piers and the fact of the dredging. Both of those things to me talk about accommodating larger vessels. And over time, and as Mr. Hudner said, this limit was established a long time ago. And we've heard a lot of evidence from people who live in the area and are considered, in that sense, experts of that area. And they are talking about any expansion, and I'm considering larger boats, a type of expansion, to be problematic and a conflict to recreational uses. And I think that while they are, even if they're not using the property of the marina, larger users will then be traveling in there. And we've heard it's difficult to see people on paddle boards and things that are in the water swimming. And that to me is problematic. and that this expansion does substantially interfere with other recreational uses that are existing in that area. And I feel that I'm not going to push for those reasons.
Thank you, Ms. Reynolds.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Mr. Gomez.
I would just, based on Ms. Reynolds' input, I would go back to Mr. DeAngelis's soliloquy, his rebuttal, I guess you would call it. But he did make a point that the type 3 waters priority 1 are boatyards and service for recreational boaters. And that goes to what Mr. Hudner was talking about, and I think also what I support. So I see that as a priority in this type of water. And the amount of expansion is contained certainly within an established area. And it seems fairly minor compared to what the initial proposals were. So I continue to support the passage of the assent.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, you know, what I commented on as far as user conflicts, that also comes from the Red Book. It's, you know, the category B requirements, 1.3.1, subpart F, subpart J. You know, alteration will not unreasonably interfere with, impair, or significantly impact existing public access to the tidal waters and shore. That's F, and J demonstrate that the alteration or activity will not result in significant conflicts with water dependent uses in activities such as boating, fishing, swimming, navigation, and commerce. And I understand the argument that's being made by you, Mr. Gomez, and others, that you cut off that balance at the, I guess, marina perimeter limit. You say within that, you know, that we get to use it and there's no, you don't consider the user conflict. I don't view it that way. I view it as it's going to, it'll certainly affect within the marina perimeter limit, but it will also affect outside of that limit as well, in bringing the bigger, more boats in. And my attempt to say I would support the dredging and not the pier extension was a way to strike, in my mind, the balance to give them what they need to operate more efficiently at their marina, but not allow something that is going to exacerbate already trying conditions in the cove in general, whether it's in the MPL or outside of it. So yeah, that's my view. Are there other comments? Yes, Mr. Hudner, and then Mr. Gagnon.
Should we be restricting the number of people who can use the water recreationally? That has burgeoned also. It's a big problem, you know. I had a guy on some kind of sail surfboard. He couldn't see where he was going. He was going so fast, he turned into a boat. He could have killed himself. And I mean, these people and small things are all over the place. And that's been an enormous proliferation. So I think this is an unauthorized taking, in a sense, of a right that goes with the marina perimeter that was given to the applicant a long time ago. And if there were objections to it, they should have been raised earlier. I mean, this has been in place for a long time. And I just think it's like an unauthorized taking, and it's a two-way street. I mean, it's not just a little more use at the marina, it's a hell of a lot more use on the water by recreational people, of which, I mean, I'm one, but I know what's going on. And it's a balancing act. And this to me seems like an unauthorized taking.
Okay.
I'm repeating myself now, so I'll stop.
No, you know, everyone should say what they want to say before, you know, we go to a motion. So Mr. Gagnon.
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. My understanding was that there are 6 kind of areas or dockages where they do maintenance. And the dredging and pier extension would allow them to work on larger vessels, but not more. So it's my understanding, if they work on 6 at a time currently, we could limit or maintain that condition that they work on 6 vessels at a time within the dredging and the extension, but not bring in more boats so that it maintains what I believe their current business process is now.
Yeah, I know that there was testimony that it was the 6 boats, they had the capacity for 6 boats, and that if they got the extensions that they wanted, they would have the ability to add up to 4 additional boats, or I guess they could just go to bigger boats overall. If we limited it to 6, would they then bring in bigger boats, but fewer of them? And does that matter to us? But I like how you're thinking. I want to talk through that. And I don't know if we can. I guess I would turn to Mr. Willis or Mr. DeSisto to ask if that could be a condition, limitation of number of boats, as Mr. Gagnon has suggested.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Willis.
Yes, it could, Madam Chair, and it's based on uses and users of the area, based on what you're hearing tonight.
Any comments upon what Mr. Gagnon suggests as a way to address, I guess, the concern of more boats that would come in as a result of pier extensions?
I think once you put the pier extension on, you've kind of done what people don't want you to do. And whether you've got 2 boats or 4 boats, it's not going to make much difference. It's putting the extension out through part of the marina perimeter. That's where people move back and forth. The traffic coming on and off a dock like that for repair work, that's not a big deal. I mean, it's all slow moving stuff, and it's not like you're standing in this middle of an avenue in New York dodging taxi cabs.
So you're saying it's just the extension out further into the water that creates the user conflicts?
I believe that's actually the case, if you could find that out, but I don't think you can find that out. I mean, you can't document it, but that's the part that's troublesome. It's not what's sitting on the dock. It's the fact the dock is there. Once you agree the dock can be there, then it doesn't really matter how many boats are sitting on it. I mean, people are talking about restricted space to sail, moving vessels that can't see them. And I mean, I wonder, I'm a person of the water, okay, professionally and personally.
Yes.
So I'm totally sympathetic to people who want to use the water, but I understand the trade-offs. And people don't, I mean, the population that's on the water in these ultra small craft has mushroomed beyond anything you ever could have imagined. People on paddle boards and little sailboats and whatever the hell else they're on, jet skis. And so that's part of the problem too. But we don't have any way to reduce that type of traffic. So they want to take it out on the people who have some existing legal rights to run a marine services business there. I don't think that's, I mean, they were given the marina perimeter and it ought to be able to be developed commercially within those parameters. And if you're going to give the dock extension, I don't think that the number of boats, I don't think it's material in the impact of this. I mean, I really don't.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Gomez.
Yeah, I concur with Mr. Hudner's observation of the increased traffic, and the example in Secundit Harbor, which I'm very familiar with, is that on a good day in the past, or a busy day trying to get to the boat ramp and launch my boat so I could go out and catch a few stripers, a fluke, or whatever it was, I'll just take a trip. on a busy day, there might be 15 people with trailers trying to get in the water. This year, because of COVID and because of the increase in ocean-going kayaks, jet skis, small craft, there are people parked when I get there at, say, 7 in the morning to go out fishing. There'll be people parked a quarter of a mile or more down the road, down past the Second Yacht Club and around. And when you get out on the fishing grounds, there are groups of 5 or 6 people in jet skis, all chasing schools of fish. So there is a big change that has to be accommodated. And I concur with Mike is that, you know, even if we don't grant this expansion, there's going to be more and more pressure in Jamestown as a result of these small craft. They're out there now, people are using them, they go out and party on them. And they run the river. So the increase is more, or the impact is more from the larger, much larger number of people going out, their needs for parking, as opposed to parking expanding a couple of piers inside of a marine perimeter limit and allowing a person to accommodate today's needs with changes to his own boatyard. So my position still holds.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's that the boatyard is the only one that has, you know, the rights here. I mean, they have, you know, their marina and they have rights that are attendant with that, but the public also has a right to use public, you know, trust resources. So I don't think it's, you know, either or. And we really do have to balance even within the marina perimeter limit. And like we've discussed, it will have an impact immediately outside of that as well. Mr. Hudner?
Madam Chair, I'd like to ask a question. I think it should be directed to Director Willis, I think, but what is the significance of a marina perimeter? Why does it exist?
So we created the concept of a marina perimeter decades ago to allow marina operations to continue to be operating as expected within the boundaries of those areas. We tie the marina perimeter tight to the structures so that a marina operator has a defined area in which they know they can operate. And it could be a typical marina that has several slips. It could be a boatyard that uses it touch and go. But the marina perimeter is to look at a water area in which marina operations are expected to occur.
Mr. Willis, thank you. But one more question, please. Is there any reason that, in your view, under the regulations of the Red Book, that says we should start changing what a marina perimeter means to the holder of that?
The concept is clearly something that the program is promoting and would support. However, there's nuances with marina perimeters, especially in tight harbors or where areas where you have competing uses. We have conditioned what goes on in that perimeter to not extend beyond that perimeter. And that is in recognition of what's going on next door, outside of, alongside of. So if the issues are such that the marina operations cannot be or could possibly be conceived to occur somewhat outside a perimeter, we would condition any approval to make sure that those activities are wholly contained within the perimeter. So that's something that we also consider.
Yeah, didn't this application start out with an intention to go beyond the marina perimeter?
My understanding is the applicant was looking to increase the size of his perimeter, so it changed the actual configuration.
And in discussions with the staff, that was not allowed. That was
discussions with the staff based on what was purported that the marina operator was looking to accomplish, and what he was asking for didn't line up, and they worked out what you're reviewing tonight.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Mr. Gagnon.
Thank you. So I appreciate the remarks of Mr. Hudner, Mr. Gomez, and Mr. Willis. And I think they make a lot of sense in terms of whether they are working on 6 vessels, 8 vessels, or 10 vessels. It's not going to have a major impact on the navigation or the harbor itself, and considering how busy it is. So I think after hearing this discussion, which has been very helpful, I would be kind of in a position to support the dredging and the extensions as it's been applied for right now.
Okay, any further comments? And if none, then I will ask if someone wants to put forward a motion.
I'd be happy to move that this application be approved. Everything's within the marina perimeters, and it's been extremely well presented from a technical point of view and with regard to compliance, in my opinion, with the regulations of the Red Book. And it honors the existence of a marina perimeter, which is intended to protect marina operations and also to contain them. So that's the balancing act that we're talking about. It's already been taken care of here. And now people are wanting to basically invade the marina perimeter and change what's already been approved for long standing. So that's both my motion and my reason. I'm sorry to be so lengthy.
Mr. Gomez?
I will second Mr. Hudner's motion.
Any discussion or further discussion? Okay, then I will do a roll call. Ray Koya.
Madam Chair, for the reasons that I enumerated in our discussion earlier, Ray Koya votes aye.
Okay, Mike Hudner.
Aye.
Don Gomez.
Aye.
Ron Gagnon.
Ron Gagnon, aye.
Patricia Reynolds.
I'm going to vote nay, citing the introduction of more and larger boats that will substantially or potentially substantially interfere with the balance of users in that area.
Okay, and myself, Jennifer Cervenka, I'm going to say no to the motion for the reasons that I previously stated. I don't think that the pier extension portion of this meets the standard under category B 1.3.1. So Mr. DeSisto, the motion carries 4-2?
That's correct, yes.
So the application is approved.
Can I make a further suggestion on this? It's something that the council has done in previous applications of this nature. I would ask that the council also vote to have a draft decision delegated to myself and Mr. Longo that we will present at your next meeting. If John, if you think that that's appropriate, we can get it done in time so that those that were present here for this meeting voting yay can take a look at that. We'll forward it out to everybody ahead of time, but have a vote on the decision, the written decision itself.
Okay, do you need a motion for that, Mr. DeSisto?
I would like one, yes.
Okay. I will move because I think I can move as a chair on a procedural matter that we delegate to both you and Mr. Longo to prepare a written decision that would be put before us for consideration at our next meeting. I will not be at the next meeting, so I'd prefer it to be in 2 meetings from now, if
That's
possible.
fine.
Okay. So that's my motion. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr. Hudner. And I'll do a roll call. Ray Koya.
Ray Koya votes aye.
Mike Hudner.
Hudner, aye.
Don Gomez.
Gomez, aye.
Ron Gagnon.
Ron Gagnon, aye.
Patricia Reynolds.
Reynolds votes aye.
Myself, Jennifer Cervenka, aye. Motion carries. You're so delegated to write up the decision.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think that concludes our one application, and we are in a position to adjourn if someone would like to move.
I move we adjourn. Hudner.
Thank you. Second,
Second it, Ray Coya.
thank you, Mr. Koya. All those in favor of council members, just say aye.
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 Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Thanks.
Night.
Night.
Thanks, everybody.